She slipped, he tried to save her. And 30 seconds later, she made the biggest mistake of her life.
Heavy rain hammered the streets of Manhattan. Yellow taxis splashed through puddles as people rushed into the towering headquarters of Titanium Partners, one of New York's most successful investment firms. Inside the luxurious marble lobby, Samuel Carter slowly pushed his mop across the polished floor. At 68 years old, every movement showed years of hard work. His faded blue maintenance uniform was perfectly clean. His shoes were old, his hands were rough, but he still greeted every employee with the same warm smile. Good morning. Most people never looked at him. Some didn't even notice he existed. Samuel simply smiled and kept working. As rainwater collected near the entrance, he carefully placed a bright yellow caution, wet floor sign directly beside the glass doors. Then he continued mopping. He had done this job every morning for almost 6 years. Suddenly, a black luxury SUV stopped outside the building. The revolving door spun open. Every receptionist immediately stood up. Several employees whispered, "She's here." Victoria Hayes, CEO of Titanium Partners. 42 years old, brilliant, fearless, and known throughout Wall Street for never accepting mistakes. She stepped inside wearing a perfectly tailored black pantsuit and razor-sharp stilettos. One hand held her designer handbag. The other held her phone. She was already speaking during an important conference call. "Listen carefully. Delay that meeting by exactly 5 minutes. I'll be upstairs." Without looking up, she walked straight across the wet marble floor. Samuel noticed immediately. His eyes widened. "Ma'am," he called politely, "please watch, you're too late." Her right heel suddenly lost its grip. Everything happened in slow motion. Her phone flew into the air. Her handbag slipped from her arm. Confidential merger documents exploded across the marble floor. Then, slam, the entire lobby froze. Employees gasped. The sound echoed through the building. Victoria landed hard on the wet marble. Pain flashed across her face. Samuel instantly dropped his mop. Without hesitation, he hurried toward her. "Ma'am, are you all right?" He quickly gathered the confidential papers before the rain blowing through the entrance could soak them. Then he reached out his hand to help her stand. Victoria stared at him. Her embarrassment instantly turned into anger. She slapped his hand away. "Don't touch me." The lobby became completely silent. She stood up, straightened her jacket, then looked around. Everyone had seen her fall. Her face burned with humiliation. Then she pointed directly at Samuel. "This happened because you couldn't do your job." Samuel remained calm. "Ma'am." The warning sign was right beside the entrance. "I don't care," she shouted. She turned toward the HR manager. "Terminate him." The entire lobby fell silent. One employee quietly whispered. For one accident, the HR manager hesitated. "Miss Hayes, perhaps we should review the security footage first." Victoria's cold stare stopped him. "I said, fire him." Samuel lowered his eyes for a brief moment. He looked at the yellow warning sign standing exactly where he had placed it. Then he nodded. "I understand." No arguing, no excuses, no anger. He simply removed his employee badge, placed it gently on the reception desk, picked up his old lunchbox, his cardboard box of personal belongings, and quietly walked toward the exit. No one stopped him. No one defended him. As the rain swallowed his figure outside, something small slipped from his coat pocket, landing silently on the polished marble floor. An old, worn, brown leather wallet. Samuel never noticed. He disappeared into the rain. Victoria took a deep breath. Then her eyes landed on the wallet. She bent down, picked it up, and slowly opened it. Her expression changed instantly. She stopped breathing. Inside was something she never expected to see. Victoria slowly opened the old leather wallet. She expected to find a driver's license, maybe a few dollars, perhaps an employee ID. Instead, she found exactly $38, a faded photograph of a little girl smiling beside an older man, a worn hospital wristband, and a carefully folded newspaper clipping that had clearly been carried for years. Curious, she unfolded it. The headline read, "Local entrepreneur sells $120 million company to save children's hospital." Victoria frowned. Then she looked at the photograph printed beneath the headline. Her heart skipped a beat. The man in the newspaper had the same gray hair, the same kind eyes, the same face. It was Samuel, the janitor she had just fired. Victoria whispered, "No, that's impossible." She quickly flipped the newspaper over. The article explained that nearly 30 years earlier, Samuel Carter had built one of the fastest-growing medical equipment companies in New York. Business magazines had called him a visionary. Investors admired him. Employees loved him. Then, without warning, he sold everything, his company, his mansion, his cars, his investments, and disappeared from public life. No interviews, no explanations, nothing. Wall Street had spent years trying to understand why. No one ever found the answer. Victoria's hands trembled. She looked back toward the rain-soaked entrance. Samuel was already gone. She immediately turned toward the receptionist. Call security. The receptionist looked confused. Is something wrong? I need every camera outside this building. Now, minutes later, Victoria stood inside the security office. The footage replayed on a large monitor. Everyone watched in silence. The video clearly showed Samuel placing the yellow wet floor sign exactly where it should have been. Then, it showed Victoria walking straight past it while staring at her phone. No one spoke. Victoria couldn't look away. The accident had never been Samuel's fault. She had fired an innocent man before anyone could say a word. A security guard quietly entered the room. "Ma'am, we found something else inside the wallet." He handed Victoria a small folded piece of paper. It wasn't money. It wasn't a receipt. It was a handwritten note. The paper was old, its edges worn from being opened hundreds of times. Victoria unfolded it. Written in neat handwriting were just a few words. "If you're reading this, remember, kindness always matters more than pride." Below it, a child's handwriting read, "Love you forever, Daddy." Victoria's eyes filled with tears. She had spent years negotiating billion-dollar deals, yet somehow, those 6 words hit harder than anything she'd ever heard just then. The HR manager entered the room. "Miss Hayes, we found Mr. Carter's employee records." Victoria looked up. "Bring them." The HR manager placed a thin file on the desk. Victoria frowned. "That's it, that's his entire file." The manager nodded. "He never listed any previous employers, no references, no awards, no business history. It was almost as if he wanted to erase his entire past." Victoria stared at the newspaper clipping again. Why would a man worth hundreds of millions choose to spend 6 years cleaning office floors? It made no sense, unless there was a story no one knew. She stood up immediately. "Find him." The room fell silent. "I don't care how. I want every security team searching nearby streets. Call every subway station, every taxi company, every hospital if you have to. I need to find Samuel Carter, because for the first time in years." Victoria wasn't chasing a business deal. She was chasing the truth. For the next 3 hours, Samuel Carter seemed to disappear. Security officers searched every nearby subway station. Taxi companies checked their cameras. Even the hospitals near Midtown were contacted. Nothing. It was as if the old janitor had simply vanished into the rain. Victoria couldn't stop staring at the little girl's photograph. The child looked no older than 8, bright blue eyes. A missing front tooth, the biggest smile she'd ever seen. Written on the back of the photo were 4 simple words: "My reason to smile." Her chest tightened. Who was this little girl, and why had Samuel carried her picture every single day? Late that afternoon, the HR manager knocked softly on Victoria's office door. "Miss Hayes, I found something." He placed an old storage box on her desk. "We were cleaning out Samuel's locker." Inside, there wasn't much. An old lunch container, a worn Bible, a pair of reading glasses held together with tape, a tiny toy teddy bear, and a sealed envelope across the front. In careful handwriting, it read, "To whoever finds this." Victoria hesitated, then slowly opened it. Inside was a handwritten letter. "Samuel's letter. If you're reading this, then I probably left without saying goodbye. Please don't feel sorry for me. I've already lived a beautiful life. The only thing I ever truly lost was my daughter." Victoria swallowed hard. She continued reading. "Her name was Emily. When she was 8 years old, doctors told us she needed treatment that most families could never afford. So I sold my company, then I sold my house, then everything else. People called me crazy. They said I was throwing away my future, but they were wrong. My daughter was my future." Victoria's eyes filled with tears. The letter continued. "Emily fought harder than anyone I've ever known. She smiled every single day, even when she was in pain. One night she held my hand and whispered, 'Daddy, promise me something. If I can't grow up, promise you'll spend the rest of your life helping people who need kindness.' I made that promise. 2 days later, she was gone." Silence filled the office. Victoria slowly lowered the letter. For the first time in years, the woman who had built a billion-dollar company couldn't hold back her tears. Then, a small object slipped from inside the envelope. It landed gently on the desk. A silver employee badge, but it wasn't Samuel's. It belonged to Titanium Partners. Victoria frowned. That was impossible. Samuel had only worked there for 6 years. This badge was nearly 25 years old. She turned it over. Engraved on the back were the words, "Thank you for believing in us." Victoria immediately called the company historian. "Tell me everything about this badge." Minutes later, the answer arrived, 25 years earlier. Titanium Partners had nearly gone bankrupt. No bank would lend them money. No investor believed in them until one businessman stepped forward, Samuel Carter. He invested millions, not for profit, but because he believed the young founders deserved a chance. Without Samuel's investment, Titanium Partners would never have existed. Victoria slowly leaned back in her chair. The company she now controlled, the office she worked in, the fortune she had built, all of it, existed because of the very man she had humiliated and fired that morning. she whispered. What have I done? For the first time in her career, Victoria Hayes canceled every meeting on her calendar. The billion-dollar merger could wait. Finding Samuel Carter could not. By sunset, the rain had finally stopped. Security teams had searched the city for hours. Nothing. Then Victoria's phone rang. We found him. Her heart skipped a beat. Samuel was sitting quietly on a bench in Central Park, feeding breadcrumbs to a flock of pigeons. He wasn't angry. He wasn't crying. He simply watched the birds with a peaceful smile. Victoria stepped out of the car and slowly walked toward him. Samuel looked up. Good evening, Miss Hayes. His voice carried no bitterness, no resentment, only kindness. Victoria stood there for a moment, unable to speak. Finally, she whispered, I'm so sorry. Samuel smiled gently. I know. She looked confused. You know, he nodded. The moment you fired me, I could see the regret in your eyes. Victoria sat beside him on the bench. I judged you because of your uniform. I never stopped to see the man wearing it. Samuel looked toward the lake. Most people don't. They see the job. They forget the person. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. Only the sound of birds and the wind filled the silence. Victoria finally handed him his old leather wallet. I opened it. Samuel smiled. I figured you might. I'm sorry. You deserved your privacy. Samuel shook his head. If opening that wallet helped you see people differently, then Emily would have been happy. Victoria lowered her head. I don't deserve your forgiveness. Samuel's answer came without hesitation. Forgiveness isn't earned, it's given. The next morning, every employee of Titanium Partners received an unexpected email. Mandatory company meeting. The entire staff gathered in the lobby. The very place where Samuel had been humiliated. Victoria stepped onto the small stage. Her voice trembled. Yesterday, I made the worst decision of my career. She turned toward Samuel, who stood quietly in the back of the room. I judged a man by his uniform instead of his character, and I fired the very person whose kindness helped build the values this company should have stood for. The room fell completely silent. Victoria continued. Most of you know Samuel as our janitor. I know him as the man who sacrificed everything for his daughter, the man who gave away his fortune to help others, and the man whose generosity helped this company exist long before any of us worked here. Employees looked at Samuel in disbelief. Several had tears in their eyes. The receptionist who greeted him every morning quietly began to cry. Victoria walked down from the stage. She stood in front of Samuel, then, in front of the entire company. She extended her hand. Mr. Carter, will you forgive me, and allow me to welcome you back? Samuel looked at her hand, then, instead of shaking it, he gave her a warm hug. The entire lobby erupted into applause. A week later, the old janitor's closet no longer existed. In its place, a quiet reading room was built for employees. Above the entrance hung a simple bronze plaque. It read, The Samuel Carter Kindness Room. Below it, another line was engraved, Never judge a person's worth by the work they do, but by the kindness they leave behind. Samuel never accepted an executive office. He never wanted a title. He simply volunteered to mentor young employees, teaching them one lesson he believed mattered more than money. Success can buy respect, power can command attention. But kindness is the only legacy that lives long after your name is forgotten. Because the richest people aren't always the ones with the biggest bank accounts. They're the ones who leave the biggest impact on someone else's life.